order. You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man.
I feel like this story should come with a bit of a health warning, actually, because it's pretty awful. LBC has been told that primary school-aged children are being sold on the streets of Glasgow for sex by their parents and relatives. It's said to be happening amongst the Roma community in the Govan Hill area of Glasgow, a fairly poor district of the city, in parts anyway. The council is denying that they have been turning a blind eye to this for fear of being branded racist. We'll hear much more in a few moments from Conor Gillies, LBC's reporter, who's been in Govan Hill speaking to people about this morning. I mean, like I said a few moments ago, there's no more heinous crime, is there, than harming your child, knowingly, willfully harming your child. If this has been going on for years, as we will hear it has, how is that still the case in modern Britain, particularly with the grooming and abuse lessons that we've learned of late? 0345 6060 973, the number to call. You can text 84850 or tweet at LBC. It was interesting to read the comments of a woman, a social, she's not quite a social worker, but a woman who works with the Roma community in this area, saying that many of the Roma families who face the same kind of discrimination and poverty and difficulties that the ones trafficking their children are facing, choose good things for their children, work hard for their children, and do not do this. So this is a choice that some families are making for their children, grooming their children into abuse. They're trafficking their children, essentially. I think we find it hard to imagine that parents and relatives would do that, but that is essentially what is happening. I'll give out a few numbers during this hour. If you have concerns about a child or anyone you think might be in a trafficking or modern-day slavery, as we call it, situation, and if you feel you know someone in that situation, we will give you a couple of numbers that you can ring where you can get help about them. Somebody else can help them in that situation. But I want to know from you, really, what you say is going on. What do you think is going on when these kinds of crimes, because that's what they are, heinous crimes, when these kinds of crimes seem to be crimes that the police and other agencies can't really reach for one reason or another? What might that reason be? 0345 6060 973. If you're listening in Glasgow or another area where you think this kind of thing might be happening, I'd love to hear from you. 0345 6060 973 is the number. You can text 84850 or tweet at LBC. As I said, LBC's reporter Conor Gillies is in Govan Hill for us. He joins me now. What do we know about what's going on there, Conor, or at least what people say is going on there?
Yeah, Sheila, this is one of the most deprived parts of Scotland, if not the most deprived part of Scotland. And to give you a bit of context here, this is First Minister Nicola Sturgeon's constituency, certainly part of her constituency. Now, I have spent the day here so far, and story after story, everyone is telling me the same thing. This problem is absolutely rife, and it involves children. You mentioned there a minute ago, it involves children as young as 10 years old from the Roma community specifically, being sold for sex. And a 70-year-old man actually earlier on told me that he was offered services for as little as £5. And what makes this so horrific today is this is not just a grooming gang. This is not teenage girls walking the streets. It's primary school children being prostituted by their own parents. And this has been going on not for days, not for weeks, not for months, but years is what we're hearing. Just to warn you that some of the things that you're about to hear in my report are seriously distressing, but we do feel that it is important to shine a light on what's happening here on the street I'm on here in Glasgow.
So I'm now walking up Allison Street here in Govan Hill, and seemingly this is the centre for child prostitution quite openly in the evenings. It seems to be a normal street, a lot of fruit and veg shops, corner shops, quite a busy street, lots of cars coming down here, families, mums with buggies. You get a sense that this could be any street across Scotland. Essentially, there are allegations of children from the Roma community here in Govan Hill sort of being forced into prostitution and sex work by their parents.
Our community people, they've been telling me as well.
What have they been saying?
There's just, there's prostitutes, underage sex. Or
Child prostitutes?
Yeah, something like that.
What age?
Underage. Girls, 10, 12 years old. Something.
10 or 12?
13, 14 years old.
Is it Margaret?
Yeah.
Connor from...
All right.
How are you getting on?
Hi, I'm all right. How do you come?
Is that all right? Margaret, we're sitting here in the pub. It's, 9:30 in the morning. And I've just been across the street at one of the corner shops and been asking how readily available these young children are, Roma children, for sex work. And the man across there says, yeah, outside his front door, he knows of friends, some of his relatives have been offered sex by young girls.
Yeah, a lot of the customers get propositioned by young girls.
What's said? What's the exchange of words?
They're offered whatever they want for £5, £10. They come in and they tell you.
What ages are we talking about here? Give us a description of what they look like.
Last week the guy that came in said the wee girl was about 15. She stopped him over at that corner. Just asked him if he was looking for business. It's the fathers that are selling them, and they're usually round about.
So children outside, are selling themselves for £5? Less?
£5. One of my customers was even propositioned with a wee boy.
What age?
The wee boy was maybe about 12, 13, and he propositioned a man of 70.
Just tell me then of the moment that you were approached by one of these Roma children.
It was a girl about 18, 19. And she said, do you want to buy baby? Do you want my baby? And I went, no. No, you take my baby. I give you my baby. You want to take my baby in close?
For sex?
Oh, she says in the close, so I went. I says, you having a laugh here? I said, away you go, don't so stupid.
How horrifying is that?
It's disgusting. Disgusting with children at their age. But they're getting taught with their mothers. Because it's a culture they live in.
So there we have it, harrowing accounts of what's happening here on the south side of Glasgow. And despite that man just at the end of my piece there saying that he wasn't sure whether that exchange between the mother and the baby was for sex, he did hint that it was an opportunity to take that baby down a side street here in Glasgow. It is important to point out that there were claims earlier on that the authorities in Glasgow across Scotland were turning a blind eye to this large-scale abuse. Both the council and the police have been on the phone to me today completely refuting those claims. It's important to just tell you what the council is saying. We are fully alert to the risk of child sexual exploitation in Glasgow. We work closely with the police and other partners through the Child Protection Committee to respond to any allegations. That's the situation. That's what's happening here in Glasgow, Sheila.
And Connor, just before you go, did any of the people that you spoke to talk about calling the police? I mean, my strong feeling is if somebody offered me their child either to buy or for sex, that my first port of call would be 999.
That was one of the questions that I was asking people, and it's because it's so common here now. They would be phoning police every other hour in the evening. From 6 o'clock onwards at night. I'm told that these children are readily available on the streets. It's happening on a daily basis. You would have police here every hour or so, is what I'm told. If this was to be reported, so they feel that they're past that stage now. The police say they are working tirelessly tirelessly to try and stamp this out. The council doing the same as well. But, you know, the sense of feeling here in the community is, you know, it's the norm.
And in the same way that in Rotherham, in Rochdale, in Oxford, in other places, there was very little, initially, there was, for a long time, there was very little coverage of what was going on, very few formal questions asked or formal investigations, despite the loud voices of some social workers and parents. Is your sense, Conor, as somebody who spends a lot of time in Scotland, is there a lot, you know, you keep an eye on along Scottish press, Scottish broadcasting, has this been higher up the agenda in Scotland, or would the same be true there?
I think the problem today is that it's very hard to try and prize any details from the authorities. It took quite a lot of work to get the police statement, and the same for the local authority. And even to try and press them, I want to sit down, I want to discuss these issues in an interview with both the local authority and the police, both saying they're working on that. But at the moment, you know, from what I'm hearing, is it's very unlikely. So it's hard to have those discussions. It's hard to get those face-to-face talks and try and put a bit more detail into the story and see what the officials are saying. So, you know, if you're coming up against a brick wall with the authorities, it doesn't leave you with much room. And in terms of Nicola Sturgeon, I mentioned it was her constituency, certainly part of her constituency. She's locked in talks with a company that's threatened with closure at the moment, so she's unavailable today as well. So that gives you a sense of what the authorities are saying. Everyone's saying, you know, these are very serious allegations. But, you know, trying to get in front of someone and have face-to-face talks or an interview is quite hard. It's
a different matter. Thank you very much, Conor, for your report. Conor Gillies reporting there from Govan Hill in Glasgow. Some social workers, unnamed, some named, some unnamed, have been quoted as saying that the police are not taking this seriously. You heard what Conor said there in his statements from the council and the police. But some saying that it's being dismissed just as an urban myth. Well, the testimony of the people that Conor met, and the woman who runs the cafe, and you know, it seems very much part of their daily life that this is happening. Wouldn't it be an appalling tragedy for those children if the authorities didn't listen, for the same reasons that the authorities didn't listen for so long in places like Rotherham, Rochdale and elsewhere? What do you think that the police and the social services and other agencies should now be doing? You know, if you don't know Glasgow at all, it doesn't matter. This could be happening anywhere. It probably is happening in lots of different environments. If we turn a blind eye to the abuse of children, what's left for us? I mean, later on this afternoon, I'm going to be talking about the hypersexualisation of children. Jamie Oliver has come out and said that he's banning his daughters from posting selfies of themselves. You know, that pouty, over-sexualised thing that teenagers do on selfies at the moment. I wonder whether the hypersexualisation of children has something to do with the apparent ease with which some adults can get away with this. Your thoughts? 0345 6060 973 is the number to call. You can text 84850 or tweet at LBC. It's 18 minutes past 1. This story, dreadful story, lots of claims from people living in the community in Govan Hill in Glasgow that some Roma families are trafficking children as young as 10 and 11, primary school children, into sex within their own communities. The first I have heard of this story is in a Times investigation. The Times newspaper that I was reading this morning. You heard just a moment ago from LBC's reporter Conor Gillies going into Govan Hill and talking to people there about their experiences. Men and women saying that parents routinely offer their children to them for sex, boys and girls. And if somebody says no to a boy, they say, what about the girl? That's one account that we've heard as well. Now, this has, in a very different and disturbing way, has shades of Rotherham and Rochdale and elsewhere, where we've learned some awful lessons, haven't we, about the grooming and abuse of young children, teenagers and children. But it mystifies me really as to why this can't be stopped. You know, social workers, members of community saying they've been raising issues around this. Some politicians saying they've been raising issues around this, local politicians, for years. How can it not have been rooted out if people have known about it for years. I suppose there's a particular shroud, isn't there, often around sexual crimes. We've learnt that with Harvey Weinstein and other instances in the last few weeks. There's a particular shroud, often of silence. But there doesn't seem to be silence in this instance. So why do you think it isn't being sufficiently effectively tackled? 0345 6060 973, the number to call. You can text 84850 or tweet at LBC. Trafficking your own child. Could there be a worse crime? 0345 6060 973. Daniel has called from Northampton to talk about this. Hello, Daniel.
Hi, Sheila. How are you doing?
I'm fine, thank you. Yeah, what do you think the reason is that we, historically, and it looks as though now here in Govan Hill, are slow to grapple with these things?
Yeah, well, it's interesting. You mentioned earlier, love your show, by the way,
Thank you.
Cracking job. Keep up the good work.
Thank you, Daniel.
I think you mentioned, for example, the fear of it appearing racist to tackle this issue. And I find it really interesting because I listen to LBC all the time. I think it's a great station, and it's wonderful to hear such a balance of opinion from across the nation. It's the only radio show for me that does that and speaks to me and tackles the big issues. But what you find is, and I find this as well on my social media feed, my Facebook, etc., you either get one extreme where people speak out and they probably are quite bigoted and they don't have the facts and they attack particular groups, or you have very, very left liberals that, defend and persecute anyone that says that a particular crime might be linked to a race, a community, a particular culture. And it seems to me we need to find a balance in this country to tackle these things, because our children must be protected at all costs.
I mean, yeah, you're right, and I think we need to we need to call things what they are. I mentioned earlier on that we're going to be talking at 3 about the sexualisation of children by themselves in their own selfies that's watched over by parents who, it seems to me, either approve of it or feel powerless in the face of it. That's another thing that I think needs to be named for what it is, and good on Jamie Oliver for doing it. But in this instance, we shouldn't be afraid to say it's happening in the Roma community if it's happening in the Roma community. We've said for years now that we're waking up, and I think we're still waking up to the scale of child abuse in this country. We know that within many homes of every shape, size, colour, race, culture, child abuse is going on within those homes. We know that most child abuse takes place within the home and the family. So let's just say things as they are and not be afraid to say Roma when it's Roma, not be afraid to say Pakistani taxi drivers when it's Pakistani taxi drivers. Let's just say it as it is. Describe it as it is.
And I completely agree. But I think that because, I think any balanced person can look at, so I've just heard this story on the radio. I don't think for a second that everyone in that Roma community
is abusing their children.
Right? That's just common sense. And I think we seem to be lacking that when we discuss these issues. But interesting, if you look at someone, and I want to be really clear here, I'm not a Tommy Robinson supporter, but if you look at Tommy Robinson, and he has tried to do this on several occasions and say, this particular Muslim grooming gang is involved with this, etc., he cannot speak in a public forum without being shouted down because it's immediately branded that he's attacking a race or whatever. Now, again, I don't know the complexity of Tommy Robinson, his history or whatever, so I'm not aligning myself to him. But what's interesting is that I watched this video of him on a program called Free Speech. I think it was on Channel 4, and they were discussing Muslim grooming gangs, etc. And he got shouted down and called a racist, etc. And he said in the program, you watch the comments on YouTube and you'll see that I do represent a large group of people's views. So I had a little scroll down, and interestingly, absolutely bang on. There were thousands of comments with people saying... Yeah,
the thing about him... you raise an interesting point. What I would say to it, Daniel, is I don't doubt for a second that faced with this story, that Tommy Robinson and I and any right-thinking person would respond in the same way to the abuse of the children. Sure. My concern, and I won't be specific because I don't want this conversation to endlessly go down that route, but my concern is that the rest of his views and some of the motivations behind his views, I would not share.
Absolutely. So I only use it as an example. I don't want it to become about him.
Yeah,
But
but you're right. No, it's an interesting coming together that you describe of views.
Well, and I think the problem is, and I think this again, not to go over the pond, but I think with the Trump, a lot of people looked at the Trump situation, him becoming president, and went, what? And I think the trouble is, what we do is, if people have prejudice views, that people like you and I think, well, that's not right. For me, what I don't want to do is I don't want to shut those people down. What I want to do is
keep hearing them.
Because if I can engage in dialogue with them, there's a good chance I may be able to change their mind about that. But if I shut it down, what I actually do is strengthen their prejudice because I've not allowed them to express it.
Well, and also we should all be open to learning from people that we vehemently disagree with. We might learn facts. We might interpret those facts differently, but we might learn some stuff.
Absolutely. And the final point, Sheila, because I realise I'm taking over the show.
No, but it's an interesting call. Thank you.
But the other thing I just wanted to mention was, I think what's worrying as well, and absolutely needs to be explored, is there are children being peddled out on the streets at 10, 11, 12 years old. What worries me most about this story is that must mean that there is a market for that. There are people willing to pay money for that.
Well, that's no surprise to me. Is that a surprise to you, Daniel? Maybe I've done this job too long.
It's not, but it's very worrying.
It's depressing as hell, isn't it?
I have two daughters that I absolutely adore, 5 and 2, who I would die for. They must be protected at all costs. And to think that this is happening and that parents are the ones peddling them
is beyond belief. I mean, it is beyond belief, except it's becoming all too believable. Daniel, really interesting call. Thank you, Daniel, calling from Northampton. This is as good a time as any for me to give you those two numbers that I mentioned earlier on. If you have concerns about anyone, whether it's in Govan Hill in Glasgow or anywhere else in the country, or if you have concerns about a child or an adult that you think is a victim of trafficking, modern-day slavery. Let me give you two numbers. If it's a child that you have concerns about, obviously you can ring other people as well. You can ring the police. You can make your own judgments. But Bernardo's have a special helpline on this as well for advice and action. And that number is 0808 800 5000. 0808 800 5000. That's Bernardo's in relation to children that you have concerns about. If it's an adult that you have concerns about, the Salvation Army is working hand in hand with the government on this and have a referral helpline, which is 0300 303 8151. 0300 303 8151. That's for adults. Ring the Salvation Army. I'll give those numbers out again before 2 and I'll tweet them as well. 0345 6060 973. Why are stories like the one we're hearing from Govan Hill in Glasgow today of children as young as 10, 11 years of age being trafficked allegedly by their parents? Why is this going on in modern Britain? Why does it seem as though the authorities are unable to stop aspects of this? 0345 6060 973, the number to call. You can text 84850 or tweet at LBC. It's 1:31. LBC has been told that children, very young children, from the Roma community in Govan Hill in Glasgow are being trafficked by their own parents and relatives to people in the city. We heard from our own reporter Conor Gillies earlier, speaking to people there who said they'd had very young children offered to them for sex. Some say that the police are turning a blind eye, the local authorities are turning a blind eye, something both refute, as you would imagine. Some say it's just an urban myth, but it seemed like there was pretty ready testimony from people that this was happening. Why do you think, given what we've learned about Rotherham and Rochdale and Oxford and Bristol and other places, given what we've learned about how this kind of child sexual abuse happens, why is it that we still don't seem to be able to fully grapple with it, fully deal with it? I suppose if there is a kind of agreement of silence within the Roma community, if there is, as some people are saying, that makes it very difficult for the police to wade in, but not impossible for the police to wade in. It's a child safety issue above all else, isn't it? Lucy's called from Reigate on this. Hello, Lucy.
I'm horrified.
I'm horrified too.
Horrified? I want to know who the chief constable is for this area, because I'm going to send him an email. I want to know what his police force are doing about it. Sorry, you've got unmarked cars, you've got plainclothes police officers, I know you're not allowed to take pictures of children, but they can. This is horrific. Absolutely horrific. And the council are turning a blind eye. Sorry, it's down to the police, isn't it?
Well, it's down to all the child protection agencies. You know, the police obviously is, I would say, the first line of defence.
Take a male social worker out with you in a plain car with plainclothes police officers. Not allowed to take pictures of children. They're police officers. They can. Find out what family they're from. This is horrific. Absolutely. If I can find out who the chief constable is, I want to know what he's doing about it. Poor children in makeup at 10 years old, soliciting themselves. This is awful.
Well, they won't be the only 10-year-olds in makeup in this country, Lucy.
I know. I agree with that. But they're standing on the streets, and men of 70-old, people of 70-year-old that don't want to know anything. I think it's just absolutely awful. But it's been going on for so long. Why haven't they done anything about it?
I know, and the descriptions, I mean, I won't read them all. I won't read them in full detail because they're awful, but one man saying it was 7:15 in the morning and a wee lassie, as he describes it, of around 9 or 10, came up and offered me, well, you can imagine what he was... So she's been trained to do that, clearly, by someone. He winces at the memory, says this piece I'm reading. I was so shocked, told her to go home to her mum and dad. Things are bad around here. It will be interesting to see, and we will find out. It'll be interesting to see how it's being policed, what the police are doing.
Well, they're obviously not doing anything because it's still going on.
Well, that doesn't mean they're not doing anything, Lucy, but something's going on, isn't it? Thank you for your call, Lucy in Reigate. Paul has called from Malden. Paul, you used to investigate child abuse. In what setting? Police?
Yes, that's correct. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. That's perfectly... And was it Lucy before saying about...
Lucy, yeah.
Yeah. She's right. We can't do it. We cannot do it on our own. There's no question about that. The problem is, if you want to go and buy a pint of milk from Sainsbury's, you go and buy a pint of milk, don't you? And essentially, if you want to have sex with a child, you go and have sex with a child. That's how it works. That's really how it works. And so quintessentially, what you're talking about is the supply and demand thing. Now, the Roma people you're talking about in Glasgow, I've been to Glasgow several times. You can't judge it. You can't say, all people from Glasgow sell their kids for sex. You can't do that, unquestionably.
Not without evidence.
What you can say is, why do people want to have sex with kids? That's the thing. That's the real thing. And until you answer that question... globally, internationally, and in the UK, you can't...
But in the meantime, Paul, you have to police the fact that people do, don't you? Yeah, we can theorise and study why till we're blue in the face, but in the meantime, we have to do everything we can to protect the children who are suffering because of that. Yeah,
but you won't do that. You can't, I mean, I left the police 3 years ago. I do training now. I train people in child abuse. You can't do that because people are wired differently. They are set in the way they live, essentially to abuse children. That's what they do.
So, when you say people, do you mean paedophiles, or are you talking specifically about the Roma who are doing this in Govan Hill?
No, paedophiles. Ignore the Roma thing. Ignore that completely.
But of course you're not. I agree with you. I don't think you are going to reset someone who has a sexual attraction to children. But you still have to intervene for the child, do you not?
What do you do then?
Police the area with a view to finding out who's abusing their children and trying to sell them.
Right. Here's the thing. Stockholm Syndrome, which is about professional dangerousness, is something which parents and carers of young people will say, yeah, everything's fine. Everything's great. It's fine.
I know.
Children won't speak to you. They won't speak to you because they've been told not to speak to you. And so you will never get the answer from those people. It's about the people who are asking for the sex. That's the thing.
But we have Times reporters, Conor Gillies, LBC's reporter, very easily going to Govan Hill and finding non-Roma people only too happy to describe the awful things that they see in their community. Who's speaking to them other than us?
But speaking still doesn't commit an offence, does it? It's not an offence to speak.
No, I'm saying the police need to speak to them, don't they? If they can't go into the Roma homes and get a conversation out of the kids or get any accusations out of the kids, speak to the people who are being offered sex by the kids' parents.
Yeah, but you need to, in law, you need to have an allegation from the individual who's being abused. You can't have someone saying, I was offered sex by someone's parents or something. You can't do that.
So if I ring a police officer, let's just do a scenario. I run a pub in Govan Hill. I ring a police officer and I say, look, I'm sorry, night after night after night, I see children being trafficked by their parents on that street corner, in my cafe, outside that pub, outside that football ground. What are you going to do about it? Are you telling me the police say, awfully sorry, unless the child puts their hand up, we can't do anything about it? You're not telling me that, are you, Paul?
Yep.
That's nonsense.
Of course it's nonsense. That's the law, though. That's what we work with. I worked for 30 years in the police, and so consequently, without an allegation from a person who has suffered the abuse, you can't go with hearsay. You cannot go with hearsay. You cannot say that...
I'm not suggesting you go with hearsay. I'm suggesting an investigation then has to take place. A careful, gentle investigation has to then take place, no?
I did 15 years, and it was very, very hard.
Well, no, I don't doubt your own experience, Paul, but I think in a way, maybe we're getting to the heart of the problem of why it's so difficult to crack. If you have those layers of silence, if you have the natural legal obstacles and standards of evidence that the police have to achieve, but surely child protection still requires intervention. It might not end up with somebody being in prison or even arrested, but it might end up with somebody no longer having their child to abuse. That would be a decent outcome, would it not? 0345 6060 973. Why is it so difficult to intervene with children who may be trafficked by their own parents? 0345 6060 973. I'll give those numbers out again for the two helplines if you're concerned about an adult or child you think might be being trafficked. It's 1:45. Easy pickings for abusers is how one resident of Govan Hill has described young Roma children whose parents are allegedly, according to many people in the community, trafficking their own children for sex. Thomas has called from Glasgow. You're familiar with Govan Hill, Thomas?
Good afternoon, Sheila. Yes, I'm a retired police officer. I've been out 3 or 4 years, but I used to work in the Govan Hill area. And historically, Govan Hill had issues, but it was on racial grounds. We had an Asian community and we had a white community, and we had a lot of racial tensions going back 10 years or so, highlighted by a horrific murder with a boy called Chris Donald, a white boy who was abducted by an Asian group. However, in the last 6-8 years, there's been a large influx of East Europeans and Romas just as I was finishing my service.
Because there was a lot of empty or cheap housing there, I'm told.
Yes, there is, and very, very poor quality housing as well. But it's all private lets, and we now find almost the Asian and white community united in fear of the East European and Roma communities. And yes, it is the case. But what we've got to remember, when I was there, your last caller was talking rubbish, really. When your scenario, when you're in the pub and you phone the police and you were to give the information as you would do, in my day going back not that long ago, 3, 4, 5 years, we would take up plainclothes observations and monitor the situation. And when we saw, in effect, children being used for prostitution, we could revert to common law in Scotland. I think it's the same in England. And we could report people for using children.
And did you do that work, Thomas?
We did in Govan Hill at my time, and again, I'm only going back perhaps 6-8 years. It wasn't prevalent. It's only in the last 6 or 8 years. There's a large multicultural centre there, but what you've got to remember also, Nicola Sturgeon is the MSP for there. We now have an SNP council in Glasgow. My own opinion, not as a police opinion, but my own opinion is getting kept low profile, because the last thing Nicola Sturgeon needs right now is another Rotherham in her hands. And yes, it is the case even imagine it is difficult.
Thomas, that's quite a claim you're making there. I mean, you're within your rights to make it, but that's quite a claim you're making, that actually at the highest level in Scottish politics there's a desire to not focus a light on this. Or worse still, act on it.
It's my opinion, observationally, yes, because there is a large East European community in Govanhill now, and votes count. And as I say, there's a lot of stuff where you're tentative to go into minority groups in case you're accused of racism. You've got to be very, very careful as a police officer.
What do you think could break this, Thomas? You know the area, you know Scottish policing.
I hate to think what has happened is it used to be Scottish policing was very local. You had 8 police forces in Scotland, Strathclyde, Northern, Grampian. What's happened now is with the government, everything in Scotland has been centralised. You now have Police Scotland, which covers all of Scotland from Shetland down to the borders and all the cities in between. It's not working, quite honestly. Again, I think the fire service is the same. If it's not the fire service of Scotland that's going that way, the Scottish public sector is being centralised, and therein lies the problem. We've now had Mr House resigned. The Chief Constable of Police Scotland, or is it the Deputy, is under investigation for bullying. It really is a bit of a mess.
Too much instability in your view?
Pardon?
Too much instability?
Absolutely. And
just
accountability is...
And just try and explain this to me, though. If in the years since you have left, Thomas, you have significant numbers of people saying that they routinely are either offered themselves or see other people being offered, or are told by people that they've been offered sex with a child by the parents or other relatives of of very young children from the Roma community, what can possibly be stopping the policing of that?
Again,
over years.
But even in the time I was in, when it came to anything involving racial minorities, you were very tentative, you were very, very careful. I hate to say it sound like a coward, but if there was a way of getting out, a lot of times you would opt out rather than put your head above the parapet.
How do you look back on that now, Thomas?
Fortunately, it was towards the end of my service. I wouldn't like to be in the police now, I have to say, because of those reasons. It is becoming more and more politicised than what it was when I started.
But a child is a child, and if a child is being trafficked, prostituted by his or her own parents, everybody has to say something about that, don't they? Not just police, everybody.
Totally agree. However, when we get information, and a lot of times people are scared to report in case obviously there's repercussions. So as police officers, what we should be doing is, when we get this information, as far as possible, if people want to remain anonymous, then keep their anonymity. I used to do that myself, and then take the observations from the information obtained and try and confirm the information that you've been given. And then you can it may take weeks, it may take months, however long it takes, you can then build a case based on the information that you're getting, strong enough to get a conviction.
But before convictions, there's child protection, isn't there? You can yes. Take a child from a situation without prosecuting the parents for a crime.
You can, but even then it's difficult. When I was there were children's units in Govanhill where children were put into care, and at that time, again, the children were allowed their own freedoms. Up to the age of 18, this was from young people up to 18, but they were allowed to go out into the community. And a lot of times they were mixing with older males. And as a police officer who was liaising with these children's units, what we did was advise the children, mostly young girls, and try and get them on side. But it was very, very difficult when they're getting offered drink, gifts, drugs. And
they'd been trained to behave that way in the first place, probably.
No, at that time they weren't being trained, Sheila. It was they were being persuaded, would be a better way of putting it.
Well, it's grooming, isn't it, in a way?
Grooming, yes, that's what I'm looking for. Grooming,
but tell me, Thomas, I just wonder if on the streets of Edinburgh let's just pop a few miles up the road. If on the streets of Edinburgh there were multiple reports over years of 10, 11-year-old white girls and boys from local primary schools being prostituted by their own parents who lived in Morningside or near the Meadows or wherever, wouldn't those kids be being literally picked up off the street by police to protect them from being trafficked for sex? I'd pick them up off the street to protect them from, I've got no authority whatsoever other than the moral authority of wanting it to stop. Why aren't they being rescued?
They were rescued by and large, going back 10 years.
These Roma kids aren't.
Yeah, 10 years ago we didn't have these children.
No, but I'm saying to you, the reason I'm going up to Edinburgh and the little white kids is I wonder whether the policing of that would be different, is what I'm suggesting. You've already said, Thomas, that people would turn up, that as an officer you would hope that it didn't land on your desk because of racial and cultural sensitivities. So is it your belief, hand on heart now, Thomas, that these children are not really being protected in the way that a little white kid from Edinburgh would be?
I see your point now. You're saying white children as opposed to from minorities. Yes, in that case, yes, I would treat white children with more comfort, shall we say. I would be more confident in dealing with it than I would be the other way with children from the Roma community. Yes, it would be easier to deal with.
I don't doubt it would be easier because of language, because of culture and all of that. I get that.
Not because of language, because of there would be less fear of repercussions.
Do you think there are officers now in the Scottish police force letting down these children?
If honest, the short answer would be yes, but I think in mitigation I would say it's difficult for them to deal with it without having at the back of your head, what if I'm accused of racism? And what if you are? You've saved a child. Deal with it. Then basically you stand to be sacked. The expression we use in the police is hung out to dry. And rather than face those difficulties, are you telling me that Scottish police officers are failing to investigate claims that multiple children are being trafficked and raped? I would hate to think so, and I would hate to think that I would ever do that. And looking back, I would always put my head above the parapet in those cases. I can't speak for everyone, though. And even if the evidence showed that you as a police officer had been right, there'd still be fear of being accused of racism for giving it your energy? If you had enough evidence that you were right, then that would be fine. But if somewhere along the line that you were seen to perhaps, the opinion was that perhaps the questioning was because someone was from a community, or perhaps the questioning was inappropriate in the slightest way, then there was always the fear that there could be racist allegations made against you. I think it's even from speaking to officers that you keep in touch with, I think it's much more prevalent now. I really appreciate your honesty. I'm pretty saddened by what you say, but I really appreciate your honesty. Do you think police officers need some kind of protections from these kinds of things in order to do their job better and more safely for themselves? Yes, absolutely. I think that they should have more backing, and more senior officers should have the bravery to stand up and protect their junior officers, and that's not happening just now. Rather than risk a senior officer risk his career, then he will hang a junior officer out to dry. Not in every case, but it does happen. And that's what really annoys me, is the fact that so many senior officers could protect more junior officers, especially those younger in service, and encourage them to do what used to be good investigative policing. And regardless, and it used to be without fear, favour, affection, malice or ill will. That was the premise of policing in Scotland. It's now, I can't say it's without fear, it is with fear. And I don't mean physical fear. So what you've told me, tell me if I'm sort of summarising this, characterising this correctly, but what you have told me tells me that there are ungoverned, unpoliced spaces in Scotland. I wouldn't say that, but I wouldn't go that far. But what I would say is the occasional blind eye turn. Okay, Thomas, thank you very much for your call. What an extraordinary call from Thomas.
in Glasgow. Loads of you ringing in on this, so we're going to continue talking about it for the next hour as well. Those sensitivities around culture, those sensitivities around race, those fears for police officers around race and culture, if that's reflected in your career as an officer, wherever you police, whether it's in Govan Hill, in Glasgow or anywhere else in the United Kingdom, I'd love to hear more from you as to whether that chimes, whether what Kevin has just told me chimes with you. And if it does, how are we going to protect children like the children in the Roma community in Govan Hill and elsewhere? 0345 6060 973, the number to call. You can text 84850 or tweet at LBC. It's 2 minutes past 2.
On FM, online, on your mobile and on digital radio. Leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.
From Global's newsroom, it's reported children as young as 11 are being forced into prostitution by their parents in Glasgow. It's understood to be happening in the Roma community in Govan Hill. Local campaigner Fiona Jordan has told LBC some builders were recently propositioned by a man with a young boy.
The construction workers were absolutely appalled, and the police were notified, and that the police did come on to the construction site and interview those construction workers.
But Glasgow City Council denies it's turning a blind eye over concerns it's being branded racist. Police Scotland say anyone worried about a child's safety should report it. Sheila will continue leading Britain's conversation on that story next. A man's been found guilty of killing his 2 children and trying to kill his wife. 47-year-old Indris Mohammed then tried to take his own life a few hours later in Birmingham. Detective Inspector Justin Spanner has told LBC there's still one unanswered question.
There is only one person that can tell us what the true motive of this crime was, and that's Mohammed himself, and he's chosen to speak to psychiatrists but not to the police.
The Prime Minister is meeting EU leaders this afternoon in Sweden, where she's expected to offer more money to settle the UK's Brexit divorce bill. Despite Downing Street dismissing reports as speculation it could double to £38 billion, Brexit Secretary David Davis hints it could be increased.
We're going through and establishing what the European Union believes about these commitments, what size they are, and then we'll make some decisions, political decisions later on.
It's understood Robert Mugabe has asked for a few more days or months as he faces call to resign as president of Zimbabwe. Earlier, the 93-year-old made his first public appearance since the military's apparent takeover. Zimbabwe's army veterans are calling for an anti-Mugabe protest tomorrow. Tesla has unveiled a prototype for a new electric-powered truck it says will go into production in 2019. The company says it can travel up to 500 miles on one charge, but motoring journalist Mike Rutherford isn't convinced.
All the electric car makers, well, let's say they're economical with the truth over the true range of their vehicles. Let's put it like that.
Sir Andy Murray has raised more than £700,000 through his charity tennis match in Glasgow. That's double the amount it raised last year. Murray took on Roger Federer in his first game since his hip injury. The LBC Markets report, a short time ago, the FTSE 100 was trading up 3 points at 73.90, while the pound buys $1.31 and €1.11. LBC weather. Windy over Scotland, gales and showers across the far north, sunny elsewhere, a high of 9 degrees. From Global's newsroom, for LBC, I'm Philip Chrysikos.
That's great. And now the bride's parents.
So it just clicked. I don't develop film in a darkroom anymore. Why do I still print invoices and bank checks? Now I pop my PayPal Here card reader in my camera bag or email an invoice with a link that gets me paid in a flash.
With a PayPal business account, you'll spend less time chasing money and more time earning it. Search PayPal business account and put yourself in the picture.
PayPal's my perfect partner.
Big smile.
Sign up is free. Terms, card reader and transaction fees apply.
LBC Travel on the M25 in Essex. Delays are now clearing on the clockwise carriageway between junction 29 at Romford and 30 for Lakeside following that accident earlier on. On the A40 in Acton, there's a lane closed eastbound at Horn Lane because a water main has burst and that's causing some delays. And it's a similar story at Finsbury in North London where one lane is closed on the Seven Sisters Road heading west past Finsbury Park Station. Looking at what's happening in Leicestershire on the M1, there's a lane closed northbound between junction 24 for Kegworth and the junction with the East Midlands Airport. A car has broken down there and is causing queues. LBC Travel, I'm Ross Powell.
This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation with Shelagh Fogarty.
Hello, good afternoon to you. If you're just joining us here on LBC, I'm going to continue a conversation that we began an hour ago, prompted by reports, and our own reporter Conor Gillies going to Govan Hill in Glasgow, after reports that many children, scores of Roma children in the Govan Hill district, are being trafficked by their parents and by other relatives. People who live in the area, people who work in the area, people who go to football matches in the area, reporting that they have been offered Roma children, boys and girls, as young as 10 and 11 years of age upwards, being offered them for sex. Now, the police say they are not turning a blind eye to it. The local authorities say they are not turning a blind eye to it. I don't see any example yet. It doesn't, I mean, I haven't investigated it extensively, so I might be wrong, but I don't see any examples of prosecutions taking place, children being taken into care because of this. I mean, that may be happening under a radar that we haven't yet reached. But the caller we just had there, who was a police officer until I think he said 7 or 8 years ago in the Govan Hill district, said a couple of extraordinary things. One, he thinks that politically at the very top, and we will put a call into Nicola Sturgeon's office on this, because he claimed that Nicola Sturgeon as MP is turning a blind eye, MSP I should say, is turning a blind eye to this, and that other senior figures in Scottish politics don't want a light shone on this issue. Well, that's too bad today, because there is a light being shone on this issue. He also said, former Scottish police officer who worked in that area, said that in his day, this was before the Roma people arrived there, but in his day, he and other officers would hope that the case involving somebody from another culture, another race, didn't land on their desk. They would hope and try to avoid that case. And it's his belief that that's probably happening now, that people are turning a bit of a blind eye to what's going on, allegedly going on with some of these Roma children. I mean, just think about this crime. Parents trafficking their own 10, 11-year-old son or daughter for money. Parents doing this. For anyone to do it is absolutely despicable. For parents to do it is beyond heinous. But what about the rest of us? Members of the community, people who work in social type work in the community have said they've tried to get something done about it, and they believe that nothing is being done about it. It can't be true, surely, that nothing is being done about it. So many of you have called on this. We're going to stick with this for the next hour. Andrew has called in Hammersmith. Hello, Andrew.
Hello, Sheila. Nice to speak to you. Sorry, I've got a bit of a cold, so I might be a bit coughy.
Join the club. Now, you are, don't worry, the LBC listeners are well used to a Theresa May coughing fit, not least her own and then mine. So anyway.
It's not, I don't think, hopefully it's not going to be as bad as that.
Okay.
There we go.
Now, you're a police officer yourself, and you used to work or still work in child sexual exploitation?
I used to work in child sexual exploitation. It's a very, very difficult environment and a very difficult arena to work in because of the way that the victims end up being programmed. And I wanted to come back to some of the things that some people have been saying. You put a very specific question to the caller who called earlier, Paul, saying, well, if I know something about it, should I tell the police? And he goes, well, not really much of a point, because the police won't do anything if the victim doesn't.
Which struck me as not true.
Utter nonsense.
Yeah. I wonder whether he was a police officer. I don't know. Maybe he just...
He hasn't been a police officer clearly within the last 10 years. The issue, well, certainly not within the last 5 years. The issues around safeguarding now are massive. It is pretty much the biggest. You literally cannot walk into a police station now where the police officers work without safeguarding, literally in big banners everywhere. It is pummeled into us, and for good reason too. When I worked in child sexual exploitation, the difficulty was actually trying to affect a real positive change within these people's lives. And very often that didn't actually mean taking people to court, because it's very often within sexual offences, it's about giving control and power back to the victim, and it's about breaking the cycle of abuse and allowing them to move forward from the dark place that they find themselves into somewhere much brighter and somewhere much happier. And that's kind of one of the things that we try to facilitate through the child sexual exploitation and through the protocols that we have. We do try our best to do prosecutions, and that is obviously, as police officers, that's our primary thing, is to actually try and do a and we do. There are things that we do to allow us to have unsupported and victimless prosecutions. And as for the last comment about you be sensitive about certain races and backgrounds, well, that's utter nonsense as well. I recently had to arrest not recently, but as part of the child sexual exploitation unit, I had to arrest half of an Asian family who were quite well known within the community because they were abusing their own children. And
they're far from the only ones. You know, we need to remember the wider picture of child abuse in this country, don't we?
They are, and the wider picture. I mean, I mean, when I talk about child sexual exploitation, the gangs, etc., we're talking. And one of the things that often comes up is everybody talks about it being Asian or it being whatever, but there aren't. The grooming gangs are all colours. Seriously, they are. They are absolutely every colour, every hue, every religion. You name it. The child sexual exploitation grooming gangs that are out there come from all backgrounds, and the horrendous things that they do are horrific.
But can I ask you, Andrew?
Yeah,
you know, a prosecution is one thing, and obviously that's a complex and detailed, evidence-based job. But child protection is a different thing, isn't it? And there's a lower bar to intervene, isn't there, than a criminal prosecution before you take somebody's child away from them. What do you think is missing from this situation if young kids in Govan Hill and maybe elsewhere are just being left to rot in this situation in Britain?
The thing, there needs to be a much more proactive approach. It's often a problem with, and I hate to point fingers at other organisations, but sometimes I found one of my biggest problems is that when I had when I had one of our CSE girls, and it was mainly girls, it was like 99% girls and 1% boys. I found that when I was trying, like the really difficult ones, when I was trying to speak to social services to get them into care, they just didn't have the resources. They didn't have the ability to do the things that they needed to do. Very often, what needs to happen is these victims need to go to one-on-one care, where they're sent to specialist child sexual exploitation, and then literally have to be deprogrammed before you can even think about doing any kind of prosecution. And that process is so long because they have to show that the child's been given an opportunity to go to a foster care, and if that's not worked, then they have to go to full-time care, and if that hasn't worked, then they can go to something else. And it is such a very long and very drawn-out process. Even those who are high at risk, it's difficult sometimes to telescope that level of care to the point where we actually need it to be.
And I wonder whether operating in Hammersmith is a different proposition to operating in Govan Hill historically. Maybe not now, but historically. What did you make? Did you hear the call I had earlier on from Kevin, former police officer who worked in Govan Hill, saying that without doubt officers would kind of hope that the Roma case, or the, not in his case Roma case, but that the Asian case, that the race-based case didn't come to him? Did you see that?
I have to be honest with you. What I see, right, from police officers is that they see something that we call griefy, and they will kind of be a bit like, But what we try to do is we try to create these specialist units, like child sexual exploitation units, so that we turn around to people and say, look, when you're dealing with this is what we need you to do, A, B, C. And when you tell them we need you to just do A, B, and C, and you program them nice and simple, do this, and this, then we can take over. We can do everything that we need to do, and we will take it from there. Then you get a much better response from the frontline officers, who can sometimes feel like they don't know what they're doing with these serious issues. So training, equip them to handle any of those complexities. At the end of the day, that's all it boils down to with most of these cases is making sure that the right people get to the people at the right time.
And a more diverse police force is vital for that, whether it's Scotland or Hammersmith.
I think it's not just about diversity. I actually think it's about caring and compassion, and I think that's the focus. If you're a caring and compassionate person and you come into a job like a police service, you will never ever let a poor, vulnerable child be more hurt than they already are. I didn't let that happen. It got to me so much that I actually had a nervous breakdown.
Oh dear.
Because
of what you saw.
Difficulties. Yeah. Because of the things that I was seeing and sometimes the struggles. of me actually trying to help these girls and not being able to, being frustrated and having my hands tied and not having the resources to do the things that I needed to do, meant that I had a nervous breakdown. And
do you work in a different part of policing now?
I've had to be moved to another part of policing.
Yeah, well, you know, time for a break, maybe.
That happens. But
from it, yeah.
It is difficult for us. We do try, and we do work hard, and I don't want any of your listeners to think that there's no point in me telling the police this, because the information that they have might be the difference between us being able to do something really positive and change a young person's life, and that person just living in absolute hell.
All right, Andrew, thanks very much indeed for your call. Andrew in Hammersmith, lots of your texts and tweets coming in from Roma people, actually, so I want to read a few of those for sure. 0345 6060 973. What do you say the obstacles are to helping children if, as we're hearing from Govan Hill, and God forbid it's happening anywhere else, but it probably is, kids being trafficked by their own parents? How can we stop that? How can that possibly be happening in modern Britain? 0345 6060 973 is the number to call. You can text 84850 or tweet at LBC. It's 17 minutes past 2.
Hi, I'm Michael Owen. Don't let being injured spoil your Christmas. In fact, I was always injured at Christmas, so make the most of it. And if you were injured on the road or at work, contact Gowing Law.
Merry Christmas, Michael. If you've been injured on the road or at work and it wasn't your fault, Gowing Law could help you win thousands in compensation. To find out more, text WIN to 80800.
Text WIN to 80800. Go win with Gowing Law.
Save up to £400 in the BT Black Friday event without the argy-bargy. Get BT Infinity at our lowest ever standard fibre price with no setup fee. Plus, there's amazing deals on BT Sport, TV and mobile. But hurry, the BT Black Friday event ends Monday the 27th of November. Simply visit bt.com/Black Friday to join BT today.
Up to £400 saving over 18 months with no setup fee. BT Sport on Sky with HD and any BT SIM offer.
This is an advert for the Mercedes-Benz GLA and GLC SUVs. You'll notice I'm not shouting. There's no atmospheric music playing in the background, no sound effects of cars screeching round hairpin corners. I'm simply here to tell you that if you buy a GLA or GLC SUV before the 30th of November, we're adding 3 years servicing absolutely free. So visit your local Mercedes-Benz retailer today.
Retail sales only. Offer applies on new GLA and GLC models only. Ordered from 17th to 30th November 2017. Registered by 31st of December 2017. Excluding AMGs and coupes. Service care plan based on 3 services over 36 months. No cash alternative and non-transferable. At participating retailers only. Full terms and conditions apply while stocks last.
Landlords. Direct Line guarantees to beat other insurers' renewal premiums for the same cover. Can your insurance do that? Switch to Direct Line Landlord. New customers only. Qualifying criteria apply. Underwritten by UK Insurance Limited.
Mark has called from West Hampstead to carry on our conversation about, if you're just joining us, let me just reset the story so that you know what we're talking about. It came to our attention after an investigation by the Times newspaper. Then we sent our own reporter Conor Gillies to the area in question, Govan Hill in Glasgow. Multiple claims that many children, scores of Roma children, are being trafficked for sex by their own parents. There are complaints that the police and the local authorities are not taking this seriously, something that both refute. But we've had some really fascinating calls, not least from Kevin, a former police officer who worked the streets of Govan Hill before the Roma community came in, when it was largely a sort of white and Asian community. But Kevin saying, amongst other things, that yes, he suspects that police probably are sometimes turning a blind eye to what's happening to those Roma children, and that there would be a different approach. I put it to him that there might be a different approach if this was happening to little white kids in Edinburgh rather than Roma kids in an extremely poor part of Govan Hill in Glasgow. And he said yes. Mark has called from West Hampstead about this. Hello, Mark.
Hi, Shirley. Your voice sounds really cold. It's better.
Thank you.
It's just as soothing as normal, but carry on. Right, I've been undercover to do with the Roma fraternity, and basically we were doing an inland revenue investigation, and we got the evidence, we got it all together, and the inland revenue said to me that never, ever touch the Roma community. There's never been a tax demand to that community. They don't chase them with tax, etc., and it's all undercover. So I'm not surprised this goes on, because the police would have had the same approach. I'd like to get...
What's undercover?
I was undercover doing an Inland Revenue investigation with the Roma community. So the Inland Revenue people we talked to said, we don't go there. We just don't send demands. We dare and do it because we're going to get called racist. We're going to get called this. So I'm not surprised this goes on with the kids, because the police will probably have the same approach. I'd like to go undercover and see what's written down and what meetings have happened to actually what causes the apathy. Well, they don't actually go after these people, because it's been going on for years if you actually start researching it. And it's a PC brigade, again, causing all this. So the Roma community are getting away with murder with the not paying tax.
But why would that be... why would it be racist just to chase up someone's tax? If you work, you pay tax. Don't care who you are.
Well, that's what the Inland Revenue says. We just don't do it. Now, in this circumstance with the kids, I'd like to hear from some social workers to see how many times the social services have gone into these Roma communities, and I bet it's nil. But they've never done it. They wouldn't do it like a white family was, slapping a child or something, and a neighbour reports it, and they're straight in there. And by the way, if white girls were doing it, it happened 12 years ago in Middlesbrough, if you remember. 12-year-olds were selling themselves, and that was squashed and sorted out in days when Ray Mallon was the Robocop mayor of that city, remember?
I'd forgotten, but you're reminding me, yeah.
Yeah, that was a massive... operation with hundreds of police, and it was we went there with the cameras, and there was girls looked as young as 8, as far as I'm concerned, and that was closed down within certainly 4 or 5 days. So they're not doing it in this circumstance because of we've got to get, as a country, we've got to get these authorities and these PC people away from the fact of no-go areas where we can't.
Well, that's why I asked Kevin whether he felt there were some ungoverned spaces in. He said no, he fell short of saying yes to that. But
there's ungoverned spaces in the whole country, Sheila. It isn't just there. I come across things all the time.
But if you look at the Rotherham and the Rochdale cases, that wasn't about the girls' colour, was it? That wasn't about that was more to do with the way those girls were viewed was to do with poverty and their perceived behaviour, wasn't it, rather than anything to do with race? But it was the race of the perpetrators that was a problem.
The community leaders were encouraging the men to go to the white trash, if you like, because their girls are too precious and they want to keep them virgins, so go to the white whatever, because they don't dehumanise them. That's why that was happening. This one is desperation, possibly, because the women are sent out to earn the money in the Roma community while the men are in the pubs. And we actually tracked them for weeks, earning money with lorries and things, and we presented it to the Inland Revenue. And I feel sorry for the guy I presented it to, because I ring up every tax return year. They say, remember me.
Okay, well, it's interesting what you say, Mark, that the Inland Revenue, I'd be interested to know what they say about that, but that in his case, it's an untouchable community. We can't have untouchable communities in the United Kingdom. We mustn't have untouchable communities here in the UK. Adil has called from Harrow. Hello.
Hi, Sheila.
You grew up there, Govan Hill.
Well, I actually spent the later part of my teenage years there. I went to the University of Glasgow as well before sort of moving out of the area. I then moved back because my parents happened to live in the local area as well. They obviously had friends, extensive friendship in the local area. They weren't keen on moving out. But in the end, we actually had no choice. And eventually, I'm actually now based in London. We were actually in a lovely part of Glasgow, Queen's Park, at one stage, which is actually very close to Govan Hill. And then I think when we had our own children, that's when we realised that this is really not the place to actually bring them up.
Because of what you saw?
Yeah, I mean, when I was actually living with my parents, it was a small flat in Govan Hill as well. There was actually quite a regular occurrence of actually people pulling up in cars outside of those flats, and sort of which I would describe as sort of young teenage girls, sort of just sitting in with them, and before they would drive away. And it was actually quite obvious. I used to do a lot of travel at that time, so I would travel a lot on taxis. And some of the conversations which I had with the local taxi drivers, they said that they're actually aware of at least 5 brothels running locally. And when I actually asked them about why they don't tell the police about it, the response was that, don't you think that they're aware of it already? And they were actually quite critical of Nicola Sturgeon in particular as well. And basically his point was that if we are aware of it, if I as a taxi driver know it, the police obviously know it as well, but they're just turning a blind eye to it. And there's been many incidents whereby my own personal...
How long ago was it, Adil, that you were told the police were turning a blind eye to this?
So I would say this was between 5 and 6 years ago. So I moved to London roughly about 2 years ago. I've actually witnessed this myself. But I would actually just add to this. Sorry, I haven't had a chance to listen to the early part of your program. But I think there's another element to this as well, is actually the lawlessness. I think it's probably less to do with racism, or that's my opinion, but also the fact that it's just impossible to govern the local area the way it is at the moment as well. Because if you can actually picture it, and this is something which we don't get to witness, thankfully, in here, at least in my area, that there's actually about 20, 30, in some cases 40 men just sitting, big muscle guys, just sitting around street corners doing nothing. And if you were to actually just walk through that, you would actually feel very intimidated. Yeah. And I've actually seen cases where fights have actually broken out on the street amongst the Roma community themselves.
But
and two police
these
officers
are all
struggling to break it.
All Roma or a mixture of people?
I would say it's actually it's all Roma, and I think it's actually unfair to label this as an Eastern European thing, because I know local Eastern European
people... Well, and to be honest, it would be unfair as well to suggest that all Roma people are like this. We've got texts, I'll read some of them out, from people who are Roma, who absolutely respect and love and take care of their children. So, we have to call it for what it is, but not extrapolate it out and presume every Roma is doing this.
That's a very good point. And I think, based on the conversations which I've had with people, is that there's actually criminal gangs operating in the local area as well. So this isn't like we can't imagine, regardless of the community, any parent putting up their child for sexual exploitation. So from the various conversations I've had with people about the local problem, this has been featured in local newspapers tons of times as well. This has been escalated to the council lots of times as well, because you can actually see this in the streets. The people are of the view that it is actually local criminal gangs who are actually doing this sort of exercise.
Well, local criminal gangs, members thereof, can have children as well, can't they? So we're far from getting to the bottom of this. But so many interesting observations, not least from people calling who either used to work in or live in Govan Hill. I will read some of the texts that have come in from members of the Roma community here in the UK and the wider UK to represent those as well. And I'll read out those numbers. If you have concerns about an adult or a child that you think may be being trafficked, I've got a couple of numbers that may be useful, and I'll tweet them as well. Some breaking news: an aircraft and a helicopter have crashed in mid-air near Aylesbury in Buckinghamshire. Thames Valley Police say preservation of life is a priority. We'll have more on this in the next few minutes here on LBC. The time is 2:31. Just remind you of the little that we know actually about that crash, that mid-air collision in Aylesbury in Buckinghamshire. An aircraft and a helicopter have crashed mid-air in Aylesbury. Thames Valley Police attending the scene say that at the moment preservation of life is their priority. So this is very early days in this incident. We have a reporter on the way down to that area, and we'll bring you more soon. Before I get back to your calls, Theo Usherwood, LBC's political editor, is here in the studio with me to talk not specifically about politics, or kind of, but TfL have looked into the incidents of rape and sexual assault by taxi and minicab drivers.
Transport for London regulates, Sheila, black cabs and minicabs, and it's published today its latest figures for sexual assaults and rapes, accusations and, of course, criminal offences where criminal charges have actually been brought. Now, in recent years, there has actually been a fall in reported offences, but for 2016, the numbers are up 20% compared to the previous year, a total of 136 crimes reported in 2015. For last year, that figure stands at 164. What is also of particular interest, Sheila, is that Transport for London has also provided a breakdown where cases have resulted in a driver being charged with a criminal offence according to company. And Uber has come out on top. Last year there were a total of 25 cases.
On top as in worst?
Worst.
Just to clarify.
Yeah. Last year, there were a total of 25 cases making their way through the courts. Of those, 13 involved Uber drivers. Having said that, 5 of those accused of committing a crime were found not guilty. TfL insists for its part that it does everything in its power to ensure those found guilty face the toughest sentences. Meanwhile, Uber points out that according to TfL's own data, 55% of all minicab drivers on London's roads use their apps. And I should make the distinction, of course, because there will be black cab drivers listening, of course, that they don't appear in the breakdown. No, there's no black cab drivers in that breakdown.
Of criminal charges or
criminal
prosecutions.
charges. And because we don't have the breakdown for the reported offences, which were the first set of numbers we gave you, I can't give you a split between private hire and black cab drivers.
But what we do know is that the black cab trade is much more heavily regulated. I mean, this is central to the whole war, isn't it, between the two in a way, that they are more heavily regulated, more heavily CRB checked, and on you go.
Absolutely, and of course this ties into the fact that back in September, Transport for London decided not to renew the 5-year operator's licence of Uber. Uber challenging that decision. Sadiq Khan, the London mayor, has said previously that there may be a way to find a solution around the negotiating table. But the reason these statistics are so important, Sheila, is that the reason Transport for London rejected the application to renew Uber's licence was on public safety grounds. And of course these statistics might...
This adds grist to their mill, as the saying goes. Thank you very much, Theo Ashwood, LBC's political editor. Let me just bring you what we do know, not much so far, about this crash involving what's described as an aircraft, we don't know what kind of plane, and a helicopter colliding in midair near Buckinghamshire Manor House, Waddesdon Manor, near Winchenden in Buckinghamshire, not far from Aylesbury. If you're familiar with the area and you're seeing anything, we'd love a call from you. Our reporters on the way down there will bring you an update as soon as they arrive there. Emergency services are at the scene. Fire officers launched a drone over the 2 pieces of fallen wreckage, and still a bid to search for survivors. Preservation of life is how Thames Valley Police are describing their activities at the moment. We're currently at the scene near the village of Waddesdon, near Aylesbury, they say. The Air Accident Investigations Branch has been informed. Staff are en route to the scene. I think by now they've arrived. Fire and ambulance services are also in attendance. Preservation of life, the first priority, as I said a moment ago. You heard in the travel news about disruption to the road network around there, likely for the rest of the day, according to Bucks and Milton Keynes Fire Service. Let me see any more information I can give you. It's if you're not familiar with the area, Waddesdon Manor is a very popular venue in Buckinghamshire, well known. It's owned by the National Trust, and this is where this mid-air collision between what's described as an aircraft and a helicopter has happened. Once we have more from that, we'll bring it to you here at LBC. If you're near the area, do call 0345 6060 973, the number to call. You can text 84850 or tweet at LBC. Let me read some of your texts and tweets on the subject we've been talking about since the beginning of the programme, actually. So, Big, has your reaction to it been? Stories emerging, certainly emerging from my point of view, but they've been around for some time, of Roma children in the Govan Hill area of Glasgow being trafficked by their own parents, their own children, their own relatives, apologies. And a lot of people living in the area and working in the area saying that the police, local politicians, local authorities are turning a blind eye to this problem. Now, we haven't been able to get reactions from any of those bodies, apart from a statement from the local authority and the police saying that they refute those allegations. No meat on that particular bone. But let me read a couple of the texts that you've sent. The cultural sensitivity pendulum has obviously swung too far if police officers are afraid to protect vulnerable children. However, it's important to remember that it's the institutional racism of police services which made these policies necessary. Police leaders need to find a sensible balance, says Julie, texting from Suffolk. Joe says, the fear of racism is exaggerated and with evidence ceases to exist. The real issue is historical neglect of sexual offences. I think Joe is onto something here. The historical neglect of sexual offences in Rotherham, for example, she says. It was the negative attitudes towards the girls and victims generally which prevents action. This text comes from, is there a name? No name, but this text says, I come from the Roma community. I was born in the United Kingdom. I live in North Kent. and I'm a 35-year-old married mother of 3. In our community, a girl's virginity is protected and valued until marriage, whether marriage is at the age of 16, 20, 30 or 50 or not at all. Authorities are not getting involved because of cultural differences. It's a joke if that's the case. She seems to be saying in this text. I might be misreading it. I hope I'm not. Children are valued in our community, whether they are boys or girls. I would say the people doing this, this being trafficking their own children, are not the children's parents. This is unacceptable and it needs sorting now. Now, we do have a statement from Nicola Sturgeon, Govan Hill. She's the MSP for the area that includes Govan Hill, and she says, these are deeply concerning claims, and anyone with evidence of suspected criminality should inform the police. The First Minister, Nicola Sturgeon's office this is from, the First Minister is closely engaged with issues in the area. Her constituency office is situated in the heart of Govan Hill. She holds regular surgeries and meetings for local people. Govan Hill, like many areas, faces specific challenges, and it's important that all sections of the community are included and involved in addressing those challenges. We'll hear from Mary in Glasgow in just a few moments. She lives quite near Govan Hill for her thoughts on this. And just to reiterate that breaking news story in the last 10 minutes or so, an aircraft and a helicopter have crashed mid-air near Aylesbury in Buckinghamshire. Thames Valley Police are attending the scene, fire rescue as well. There will be some disruption to travel around the area, but the biggest priority, rightly according to Thames Valley Police, is preservation of life. Several people thought to be injured or feared injured or have lost their lives in that. We will find out soon enough. We have a reporter going down there. Stay with LBC for all of that and more. It is 2:45. We'll go live to Aylesbury in Buckinghamshire in just a moment, where an aircraft and a helicopter have crashed mid-air. Police, fire and ambulance at the scene, as you would expect. Thames Valley Police saying preservation of life is their priority at the moment. Our reporter Patrick Hildred is at the site. We'll talk to him in just a moment. First, though, this story that we've been talking about for almost 2 hours now, claims of Roma children in Govan Hill, scores of Roma children in Govan Hill in Glasgow being trafficked for sex by their own parents and relatives. Our reporter Conor Gillies spoke to people there earlier today. We heard his report earlier on with some really distressing and startling claims being made by the local community. There's been a development here, Conor, since you spoke to the police. Tell me what's happened.
Yeah, just in the last hour or so, I've been putting these serious concerns, serious allegations to Police Scotland, the man in charge of policing here in Glasgow. I played him that full report that you heard here on LBC, and he confirmed that he was very disturbed and truly shocked to hear that that was going on. He says that that is not what the police on the ground and the sort of partner agencies are hearing, and that is the first that he's hearing of this. And I put it to him that it took me 2 minutes to walk down the street and find someone who had a story to tell about being approached by these children. So he says an investigation will now be carried out. He will try and approach the people that we heard here on LBC earlier on to take swift action. This is what he had to say. Apologies, I thought we were going to hear from the police there, but no, that's essentially what he said there, Sheila. So, swift action being taken, and it's fresh developments as we go through the afternoon.
It's interesting, isn't it, that they say, well, this is news to us, because that is not the experience of the people you spoke to.
Yeah, and I think what struck me, Sheila, was that I was only in the community, as I said, for a number of hours, and it was person after person, story after story, so graphic, 70-year-old men being approached by 10 and 11-year-old girls, Roma children from the community in Govan Hill, selling them sex, or wanting to sell them sex, and each and every one of those people was as horrified as the rest of us are, and declined those offers. But it just shows you the scale of this problem. The police say they are working tirelessly on child sexual exploitation in Glasgow. They know it's a problem, but I think they were quite shocked to hear the extent of how candid the responses were when I just approached people on the street, went into the bars and got those numerous responses.
Which would suggest that they aren't afraid to speak up, but presumably others are afraid to speak up. Perhaps those with most authority are within the Roma community itself.
Exactly, and I think that the biggest problem here is that a lot of the community don't speak English, and you've got a situation where it's the parents who are forcing their own children into this prostitution work. So it's a vicious cycle. Who do they speak to? And if they do speak, the ramifications of that are something else as well.
Thank you, Conor. Conor Gill is LBC's reporter in Govan Hill. If we can get the comment made by the police officer, we'll bring that to you. Let's go live to that site near Aylesbury where there's been a crash between what's described as an aircraft and a helicopter. I can just say, before we hear from our reporter Patrick Hildred, who's there, that Waddesdon Manor, the large estate near Aylesbury that I mentioned, says that the air crash between that helicopter and aircraft hasn't happened within its grounds. So that's something that we do know. Patrick, tell us what you can see. Tell us what you're hearing.
So just opposite me is an entrance which is coned off by Thames Valley Police, who are in attendance at this incident. We've also got 35 firefighters at least at the scene from 3 counties, including crews from Urban Search and Rescue. And there's been a helicopter flying overhead as well. This is all because of this, as you say, a helicopter and an aircraft in collision, a mid-air collision earlier on this afternoon, just after midday, just a few minutes after midday. This is believed to have happened. The Air Accidents Investigation Branch have confirmed the crash involved a helicopter and an aircraft, but they're not saying what type of aircraft it was. So I'm looking across it. As I say, the Thames Valley Police have coned off one of these roads. We're in the Waddesdon Manor area, so it's full of fields. Can't actually see the scene of any wreckage or anything here, but this is an area that's very popular with light aircraft. There's a lot of small airfields and landing strips in the area as well.
Thanks for now, Patrick. Patrick Hildred at that site near Aylesbury. Staff from the Air Accident Investigation Branch have been sent to the area, but police said, as Patrick reiterated, that the priority, as you'd imagine at this stage, is on saving lives. But just to reiterate that Waddesdon Manor says it has not happened within their grounds. Kevin has called from Chiswick. Let's carry on our conversation for the next few minutes anyway, before the news at 3, about this situation in Govan Hill with Roma children allegedly being trafficked by their own parents. Kevin, hello.
Hello, Sheila. How are you?
I'm fine, thank you. Yeah, what did you want to say, Kevin?
I'm just calling in. I'm quite sad to hear this, really, to be honest. Not shocked at what's going on, but more surprised how blatant it is. Now I'm hearing that 10 and 11-year-olds are on the streets, and it's quite sad, to be honest. And it's very hard, I believe, for the police to deal with the situation when it's an in-house problem. So it's very difficult for them, and I kind of do understand that they are in a difficult situation. I'm not sure what they're going to do about this.
The confusing thing to me seems to be, we have the police expressing shock and surprise to our reporter Conor Gillis when he gives them the reports that he made this morning, and the claims being made by local people this morning. We have Nicola Sturgeon's office, the First Minister, whose constituency covers Govan Hill. She's an MSP, of course, as well as First Minister. It says that it's important all sections of the community are included and involved in addressing these challenges, and yet you have members of that community saying they're not being addressed by the authorities in the community. So there's a lot of confusion around this, isn't there?
Well, there is, but I mean, the whole issue is because it's an in-house situation. It's quite difficult for victims, and like you said, it's the parents that are putting these children on the street. So, I mean, it's not everybody in that community that are involved with all of this that's going on, to be honest. So, I mean, it's going to be very difficult. I mean, there's a lot of technology out there that can help these things, but you tend to find that the government end up using these informations quite basically in their own way, and sometimes it breaches a lot of our privacy, if you understand what I mean, with other...
Yeah, but I think with this case, I don't think technology is the issue, is it? I think this is people being listened to when they make allegations, and police officers feeling that they can investigate allegations of minority communities without themselves feeling afraid of being accused of racism and losing their own jobs, as we've heard from a number of officers this last couple of hours. I mean, we can't have police feeling they cannot do their job because of the colour of the skin of the people they're investigating.
I mean, that shouldn't be an issue. We're talking about children here, and we have to just kind of forget that and deal with the main issue and the most important issue, which is children. If that's going to be an obstacle in our way, then what are we doing? Are we just going to sit there and wait? What's more important to us as a community? And to me, that's not good enough. They need to just move on with that and just try and help the children that are becoming victims of something that's just appalling.
It is appalling, and I'm sure now that the attention has been focused on it, not just by LBC but by the Times who are investigating it, Connor's audio being given to the police in the area as well. I'm sure that something will happen now. Let me just reiterate that statement from the First Minister, Nicola Sturgeon. She says these are deeply concerning claims, and anyone with evidence of suspected criminality should inform the police. The First Minister is closely engaged with issues in the area. Her constituency office is situated in the heart of Govan Hill, the statement goes on, and she holds regular surgeries and meetings for local people. Govan Hill, like many areas, faces specific challenges. It's important that all sections of the community are included and involved in addressing those challenges. I will tweet the number that you can ring for Bernardo's if you fear a child is being trafficked or held in some way in modern-day slavery, or the Salvation Army, a separate number, referral helpline, if you think an adult that you know or see is in trouble in a similar way.